How's it going, everyone? I'm Northstar. Now that Gigantic has already been out for just under a week, I've seen there's a lot of confusion around creature summons, what creatures to put, when to upgrade, and where you should put them on which maps. So today, I'm going to give you a guide on which creatures to summon, what all the creatures do, and where to summon them. Let's get started. First, let's begin with what creatures actually are. Creatures are not playable characters in Gigantic. Creatures are NPC opponents. Creatures can only be summoned on power circles. A creature's main role is to gather power when it's on that creature's power circle. There are 6 different types of creatures in Gigantic, but they all have 2 variants, the baby variant and the adult variant. Upon killing a baby creature, you will get 10 power. Upon killing an adult creature, you will get 20. However, adults have slightly more HP than their baby variants, and they collect power orbs faster than babies. Now with that overview out of the way, let's get into each creature and its variants. First up, we have Bloomers. While all creatures can heal in a small AoE around them, a Bloomer can add to that heal. Bloomers can spawn 2 healing orbs around the area of their power circle, and can heal allies close to them directly. A basic Bloomer has 6000 HP as a baby and 6200 HP as an adult, and it takes 1 focus charge to upgrade to an adult Bloomer. There are 4 different types of Bloomer. Each one has the default effects I've just described, but the other 3 have additional effects added on top of that. The Winter Bloomer has 6000 HP as a baby and 6600 HP as an adult. The biggest impact a Winter Bloomer has is that its healing orbs grant a shield. A Winter Bloomer also costs 2 focus charges to upgrade to an adult. Up next, we have the Spring Bloomer. This Bloomer has 6000 HP as a baby and 6400 HP as an adult. The big thing it has is its healing orbs grant cleanse, which removes all debuffs. The Spring Bloomer costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. Lastly, for the Bloomers, we have the Autumn Bloomer. The Autumn Bloomer has 6000 HP as a baby and 6500 HP as an adult. Its healing blooms grant invisibility and speed boost, and the Autumn Bloomer costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. Up next, we've got the Cerberus. Like all creatures, the Cerberus can heal in a small AoE around itself. However, the Cerberus's main draw is that it reveals enemies in a radius around it on the minimap. This is amazing for spotting out rotations by the enemy team. A baby Cerberus has 4900 HP, and an adult Cerberus has 6400 HP. They also cost 1 charge of focus to summon. Up next, we have the Shadow Cerberus. As well as showing up enemies on the minimap in a radius around it, it grants allies near itself invisibility. It also has additional attacks, which causes it to teleport around, making it very difficult to hit. A baby Shadow Cerberus has 4900 HP, and an adult Shadow Cerberus has 6400 HP, and costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. Lastly, for the Cerberuses, we have the Stone Cerberus. Again, like all Cerberuses, it shows up enemies on the minimap in a big radius around itself. The main draw of the Stone Cerberus is its powerful melee attacks and its immense HP when upgraded to an adult. A baby Stone Cerberus has 4900 HP, and an adult Shadow Cerberus has 7000 HP, but costs 3 charges of focus to upgrade. Now we're on to the Cyclops. Like all creatures, the Cyclopses are able to heal allies in a small area around themselves. The main thing that a Cyclops provides is that it will place a wall in a choke point on the map that allows allies to pass through but stops enemies from going through. The default Mountain Cyclops has 5100 HP as a baby and 6500 HP as an adult, and costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. The next type of Cyclops I'm going to discuss is the Yeti Cyclops. As well as putting up a wall at a choke point that lowers when allies want to go through but blocks enemies from going through, the Yeti Cyclops will attack enemies and freeze them, slowing them and dealing damage over time. It will also create a frost area around itself, slowing enemies and dealing damage over time. A baby Yeti Cyclops has 5100 damage, and an adult Yeti Cyclops has 6600 damage, but costs 3 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. Up next we have the Riftborn Cyclops. These Cyclopses don't perform any unique attacks, and they still have a wall that they put at a choke point that blocks enemies from going through but lowers when allies want to go through. Their unique trait is that the walls that they put up are see-through and allow allies to shoot through them. However, they still block enemy projectiles when going through. A baby Riftborn Cyclops has 5100 HP, and an adult Riftborn Cyclops has 6500 HP and costs 3 charges of focus to upgrade. Now we're on to the Drakes. Drakes are all about damage. Every so often they'll do siege attacks, sending out damage from above to an area on the map, and when close up they'll deal immense damage and all their attacks will inflict burning. A default Fire Drake has 4900 HP as a baby and 6300 HP as an adult, and costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. The other type of Drake is a Storm Drake. They will also perform these siege attacks. However, instead of their attacks inflicting burning like the Fire Drake, all their attacks inflict shock. On their close quarters, they also inflict immense damage and shock on their attacks. A Storm Drake has 4900 HP as a baby and 6300 HP as an adult, and costs 3 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult. Up next, we have the Crimson Infernals. These creatures will create a one-way portal for their team near their power circle. These can be an excellent way to escape, rush into a fight, or quickly reposition for a push. A baby Crimson Infernal has 4500 HP, and an adult Infernal has 5050 HP, and costs 2 charges of focus to upgrade to an adult, so they are quite squishy even as an adult. Lastly, we have the Ancient Obelisk. These creatures are extremely unique in Gigantic, as they can be summoned on both ally, enemy and neutral power orbs. However, no matter what power orb they're summoned on, they will not collect power at all. They also don't grant either team power when they're killed. They will also only attack enemies if there is power on their power circle. A baby Ancient Obelisk has 2400 HP, and an adult Obelisk has 4200 HP and costs 1 charge of focus to upgrade to an adult. Now that we've went over what all the creatures do, I'm going to show you guys what I think are the best creatures to summon on each map. I will not be detailing which variant of each creature to put on these points, because I think that's better for players to figure out themselves. We're going to start with Ghost Reef. I'm not a big fan of putting Cerberuses on the Reef. Because the map is so small and rotations are quite easy to spot, it's quite unnecessary to have them. On A and G point on Reef, I would recommend putting a Bloomer to help you stay sustained and keep fighting on C or E points, or putting a Cyclops on A or G point, so the enemies can't flank around to get you if you're low on HP and need to recover. Also, if you think that the enemies are going to go creature killing and try and kill your back points, putting a Drake on A or G point can be very useful. This is because Drakes deal a lot of damage and are hard to creature kill on your own. For B and F point, I would recommend putting either a Drake or a Bloomer. Both of these are great to stop creature killing and get back into the fights quickly. Putting a Cyclops on B and F can also be very useful. The wall that the Cyclops will put up will block a line of sight to under your Guardian, so if you want to get safe, they can't hit you. For C and E point, I will always go with a Bloomer or a Drake on our front points. This is because having a Bloomer allows us to get back into the fight quicker, and the point is more up front so we can be closer to the action. The reason for putting a Drake on C or E is that they deal a lot of damage, and the siege attacks they do can stop enemies from pushing up the ramp altogether. A big piece of advice I want to say though is do not upgrade C or E point in most situations. Oftentimes adult creatures are still quite easy to kill on their own, and they give 20 power instead of 10. However, A and B point are still good to upgrade at times. The only thing you can summon on D point and Reef is an Obelisk. This is because it's a neutral point, Just remember, you don't have to put a creature there if you don't want to. Just know that Obelisk is the only one you can put there at all. Up next, we've got Sanctum Falls. On Sanctum's A and F point, I would recommend putting a Cerberus, as oftentimes, assassins will go far back on this map to creature kill. Since the map's so big, it takes a lot of time for your team to get back there to stop them, so it's good to put a Cerberus there to know early. However, putting a Drake there is also good, as its high damage can stop the creature killing early, by forcing the creature killer to retreat. On B and E point, I would always recommend putting a Bloomer. A lot of fights are going to happen between C and D point, so you want to be able to get healed up and run straight to them quickly. However, if it comes to a rotation where you've went and killed their E or B point, putting an Obelisk there can actually be quite good to stop them from getting any lead. On C and D point, I will always recommend putting a Cyclops wall. On C point, a Cyclops wall blocks their ramps direct access to E and B point, which is where their Bloomer is, and makes them have to go a long way round near D point. This means enemies will have to use more stamina and have to go a longer distance to get out of the fight. On D point, the Cyclops wall makes the enemies have to go through a tight hallway to get up to it. This means if you time it right, you can catch them all in a hallway and trap them. Now on to Sanctum's Clash. During Clash, the map changes and goes to a smaller arena. On their A or F point, I would recommend putting a Cerberus, so it's easier to spot rotations. On B and E point, I would recommend putting a Bloomer or a Cyclops to either get heals or have protection before rushing up to C point. On C and D point, a Cyclops can be very strong. However, a Cerberus is also quite good here. This is because a Cerberus moves a lot more than the other creatures, and will therefore dodge a lot of damage it takes. Up next we have Siren Strand. On A or G point on Sirens, I would put either a Cyclops for the wall and protection, or a Bloomer. The instance I would take a Bloomer over a Cyclops in this situation is if you're going to be fighting in the hallway a lot to get D point. The Bloomer will place a healing orb really close in the hallway and allow you to stay in the fight longer. For B and F point, I will always recommend a Bloomer as well, because if you get low fighting on D point, you have the option to run back to B or F and get healed up. On C or E point, I would recommend putting a Cerberus or a Cyclops. If the enemy team doesn't have many heroes that give them vertical mobility, such as jump pads or the ability to fly, I would put a Cyclops. If they do have a lot of aerial mobility, very fast characters, or have a lot of assassins who can creature kill, I will put a Cerberus, because it shows you when they're rotating. On D point, on Sirens pre-clash, I would recommend putting a Cyclops. This limits their access to only 2 ways of getting into D point, and allows you to keep track of them easier. However, if you find that they're ranged or poking D too much because it's sitting still, a Cerberus can also be used, as it will move more. Now we're on to Sirens post-clash. On A and G point, post-clash Sirens, I would recommend a Bloomer so that you can get healed up and get back into the fight on D point easier, or a Cyclops for a bit of extra protection from flankers. On B and F point Sirens, I would recommend putting a Bloomer. For C and E point, again, it's all about whether they have that mobility to get over the wall or not. But remember, a Cerberus is extremely good at watching for those side rotations. And for D point, I would always recommend putting a Cyclops. Alternatively, I also think a Drake can be quite potent, because if they come in to try and kill the creature, they'll take a lot of damage. Now we're on to Ember Grove. On Embers A and G point, I think a Bloomer, a Drake, or a Cyclops can work here. On B and F point, I think putting a Cyclops, a Bloomer, a Drake, or a Cerberus can work. For C and D point, a Cyclops is always good, as is a Cerberus, a Drake, and an Infernal. The Infernal will give you direct access to E point, which is in the middle of the map. This is an enemy only point, so only obelisks can be summoned on it, meaning it won't collect power automatically, so having that direct entrance in is really good for stealing power. Honestly, for Embers and Clash, I would keep everything the same. Embers doesn't change that drastically in terms of the map. Now we're moving on to Sky City. On A and G point, I really like putting a bloomer or a drake. A lot of the fights in early game are at the side ledge over by A and G, so having a bloomer or a drake can either keep you healed up while going in and out of fights or stop enemies from pushing into your point. On C and D point, I would recommend putting Cerberuses or a drake. On F and B point, I would recommend putting a cyclops, a Cerberus or a drake. These are all in a measure of turning people away from backcapping your points and turning them into obelisks, or just capturing them themselves. And on E point, since it's enemy only, an obelisk is the only thing that could be summoned here. Now we're into Clash. On A and G point, I would recommend putting a bloomer, a drake, or a cyclops. On C and D point, I would recommend putting drakes or Cerberuses. On F and B, I would recommend putting either a bloomer or a cyclops. And H is also enemy only, therefore the only thing you can summon on is an obelisk. Lastly, we have Picaro Bay. On A and G, I think having a bloomer, a cyclops, or an infernal could be good. On B and F, I would really recommend putting a cyclops. Alternatively, you could also put a drake for a bit of extra damage if they were to push it. For C and E point, I think the best two creatures to have are a cyclops or a Cerberus. Now on to Clash. During Clash, I think the creatures are pretty much the same. For C and E, however, maybe having them as Cerberus or Drake instead of a Cyclops could be useful. And that'll finish us up. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you learned something and I hope that you found these useful. I knew it was something that was a bit ambiguous and I've seen a lot of people upgrading points on random places. I didn't go into upgrading much because the meta's changed now and a lot of times upgrading can actually be a good thing. But there were some instances like on Reef where that is definitely a risk to upgrade. But anyways, thank you very much for watching and I hope you enjoyed.